Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives, or maybe others, with the power of psychedelics. Please note, if you're considering working with psychedelics, please stay legal and stay safe. Do your research, understand the contraindications, test all your substances. Psychedelics are not for everybody. You can check out my book, The Grief Trip, How I Learned to Heal with Grief and Psychedelics. You can find it at thegrieftrip.com. 100% of proceeds go to the Ian Preston Memorial Fund to help support mental health and suicide prevention. Okay, in this episode, I had the honor of speaking with CJ Spotswood, also known as the Entheo Nurse. CJ is a board-certified psychiatric mental health registered nurse. He has worked in the medical field for nearly 20 years and practices a holistic approach in his nursing, having graduated from one of the 14 recognized holistic nursing schools in the country. CJ was one of the original guests here on the Stoned Ape Reports, and I'm excited to have him back. He's here to discuss his new book, The Microdosing Guidebook, available now pretty much everywhere. He shares his insights into microdosing and much more. So please enjoy this conversation with CJ Spotswood. All right, well, CJ, thanks for coming back. Welcome back to the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm very excited because you've got your book that launched on Bicycle Day, of all days. It's the Microdosing Guidebook, and microdosing right now is such a big thing, and it's awesome to have somebody like you out there giving people guidance and whatnot out there. So first of all, thanks for doing this, and welcome back.
Thank you for doing this, and thanks for having me back. It's very exciting now that I actually have something to really talk about more than just my experience. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I know when we talked about your experience, and the idea for this book has been around in your mind for a long time. And you told me, you said, hey, when I get this book done, we want to do this again. So before we get, jump straight into the book, why don't you give us a little bit for those people who don't know you? Because it's funny, I talk to other people in the community and I'm like, oh yeah, CJ Spotswood. And most do, but some people are like, oh, I'm not really sure. I'm like, the Entheo Nurse, like, oh yeah, that guy. So why don't you just give us a little bit of background on who you are and why psychedelics?
Well, I'm CJ Spotswood. I'm going by the Entheo Nurse. I've been a psychiatric nurse for over 20 years, and more recently, I just graduated and I have a practice here in Maine. I am working in integrative behavioral health, where I'm working as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I've got a couple of hundred patients probably now in my care in practice for the last year. But prior to starting all of that, I've started working in the psychedelic space. I had an experience with a patient a couple of years ago who had a first-time psychotic break in their mid-50s, did not fit the mold, didn't know what we were doing, like what exactly was going on, did a full workup. And as we started medications in the emergency department and working with him, he had disclosed that he was trying to self-medicate with penis envy mushrooms, which are a very potent strain of psychedelic mushrooms that he had gotten a hold of, which then led me to wanting to learn more. I'd known that there was some research out there from back in the 50s and 60s looking at psychedelics for medicine, but I didn't know quite the extent. And at the time, it was a couple of months before Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, even came out. So I started doing my own research and looking into it, and found some research and some papers by Hamilton Morris, because he started looking into more of the penis envy at the time. Yeah, I just was blown away by it. But so as I started doing some of the research on it, I decided to throw in a abstract to a national conference for the American Psychiatric Nurses Association, and they picked me to go and talk about psychedelics. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and I didn't know what the crowd was going to be like, considering here I'm talking in front of psychiatric nurses who most of the time are working with patients who have had substance use issues or negative outcomes from their psychedelic use or past drug use. And when I went up there and talked, I spoke in front of like 500 people. It was standing room only. and it was well received, and everyone was asking questions. And the rest of the time I was there for the conference, people kept coming up to me going, "Oh my God, that was so interesting. I want to know more. I want to learn more." And I was like, there's something to this. And I started doing some more research. I ended up talking about it at school. My professors in grad school were very open to it and were very appreciative of it and really encouraged me. And I knew I was kind of onto something. And here I am now, about 5 years later, still doing it. And I just started school. I'm at the California Institute of Integral Sciences. I'm going to do a post-grad program in the Boston cohort for this year, where I'm going to be working with a lot of the psychedelic therapists who are already in the field and learning more from them, and be able to graduate in a year to be able to be the hope is when and if psychedelics are approved by the FDA, I'll be able to be working with them legally.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yeah. You've made quite an impression out there, and I know a lot of people are following you and listening to what you have to say. So tell me about, how did you get into microdosing? What's your background in microdosing, and what kind of inspired you to write this book? And also just, kind of give us an overview of what the book is all about.
Well, it was kind of an interesting journey of how I got here. Just like with the psychedelics specifically, I was working, I'd done a couple of presentations, a couple of projects, and I had someone reached out to me who wanted to kind of know if I'd be willing to work with someone who is a microdosing coach. I said, yeah, I'd be interested. I'd kind of, and at this time I was skeptical at best, because everything I'd read and everything I'd heard about, superficially was microdosing is all a placebo effect. And really was like, I don't know, but okay, it's catching on. People are doing it. And so I end up meeting with Taraleigh Weathers. When I met with her, she is a microdosing coach, like I said, self-help coach. And she wanted to know if I would be help her out, because she kept getting fielded all these questions about medication interactions and potential safety concerns. And she was like, this is over my head. I don't know these types of things. And when she was talking with Daniel Janikian at Mount Tam Integration, he had said, I've worked with CJ. He's in the field. Maybe you can reach out to him. So I told her, I'd be interested. I don't know. I was skeptical, as I said, but I started to do a little bit of the research and reading about it, and I was like, oh my God, there's so much more here to really go into. Because my concern at the time was, I don't want to put down microdosing coaches and people that are out there doing it by any means, but she admitted, I'm over my head. I don't know the medication potential interactions and all of that, and I don't even want to, put out that I do. I would you be willing to kind of jump into this? So I told her I would, and we started working on it, and I started putting together a handbook for it. I started looking at like the drug-on-drug interactions, putting in there, doing a 6-week protocol, and doing a little bit of the cognitive behavioral piece to kind of go with it, to kind of break our thought process and really look at it. And I really started digging into Dr. Fadiman's work and Dr. Fadiman's research and everything. And I realized, when everyone talks about microdosing, they refer to Fadiman's work in the microdosing or in the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. But if you go into that research itself, it's only a couple of pages where he talks about it. But everything is out there, in conferences, podcasts that he's done, his literature that he has published out there. But there's no handy book or handy all-encompassing reference book. So I started pulling all that information together into this handy book, and I got to the point where I started working with the group on it. And one of the things I said is that, I don't want to be giving medical advice. I'm not working with you. You are not my patient. But if you're, what I'm encouraging you to do is kind of talk to your medical providers about your safety concerns. What can you do? And have those blunt conversations. And so what what really got me was there was this one line I put in the book in the initial draft was, if you have questions about this, talk to your medical provider. And you can even bring this book with you to show them, because I'm going to give you the information of what I've found out there, and citing the where I'm coming from. I'm not just making this up. And I realized at that point, I'm like, this is so much bigger than just a quick little handbook in a microdosing group project, talking with people. Like, there's going to be providers out there like myself that would love to have something to look at and read myself, to make reference to learn from. And that's when I kind of was like, let's expand this. So I started reaching out to some publishers. I'd reached out to Michelle Janikian, who had wrote the psilocybin guide, and she was going through Ulysses Press. So I reached out to them, and they were gracious enough to jump on board and said, we would love to go with this. Let's come up with a deal. Let's come up with a plan. And about a year later, I had the rough draft put together. I had the working with them to kind of edit it, and all said and done, it was about a year project. And now I'm holding the book in my hand. It's just amazing to me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's fantastic. So who's this book for then? I mean, it sounds like it started off as kind of a guide for groups of people going through a microdosing regimen, but you saw to expand it. So who out there should be buying and reading this book? Who's it for?
Well, other than everyone, I encourage everyone to buy my book. It's kind of, I wanted to make it presentable. I wanted to make it approachable. I wanted to make it easy to read, easy to flip through. So when I initially wrote the book, I'm coming from my academic background. I cited everything, every sentence I'd written. I went back and in working with the publisher, they said, you are the professional. You are the one that is saying this. You don't need to reference your work. You don't need to kind of put it out there. It's coming from you. So it was kind of like, okay, I agree with that to an extent, but I want to also make sure that this is where if someone has questions, they can know where I'm coming from, other than just taking my word as gospel or just going, okay, this is where you're coming from. I wanted to have it so people know where it is. And also, especially healthcare providers. Like I thought it would be important. I could envision someone going in and talking to their PCP or their psychiatric provider and saying, I'm thinking about doing microdosing. I'm on these medications. Here's what I'm thinking, and here's where I'm coming from. So the book was put together in 3 sections. There's the first part of the book, which is for the average person who knows enough to say, I know what microdosing is. I want to come up with an idea. I want to look at protocols. What is a protocol and what might it improve for me? So I put that together, which is the meat of the book. That's probably 85% of the book. And then there's a little 5% of the book maybe that is for the providers. And I wrote in, directly talking to providers. And I preface it with, this is a little bit deeper than for the average person who is not in the medical field. It is, I want to make this, approachable for anyone to read, but I'm going to be talking in, medical jargon. I'm going to be talking in, as I was talking to my peers of having, a conversation about medications. So, bring this to your book. And I even said to the people, the providers in here was, I think it's important to have these conversations, the risk reduction, harm reduction model. We're talking about medications, but how many times are we having conversations with our patients as providers of, you shouldn't use this drug, minimize your alcohol use, your tobacco use, marijuana use. We talk about the use of heroin, fentanyl crisis that's out there, and kind of have this, I don't condone what you're doing, but if you're going to do it safely. And I mentioned, in some of the research out there, people, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I know it's like less than 20% of people that are microdosing have ever talked with a medical professional about their plan and what they're going about that. And I'm hoping that's going to change as people will go to their provider. And I said to providers in that section also, if someone's coming to you, I think that we have a obligation, even if we don't feel comfortable, just saying to the patient, I don't feel comfortable with this conversation. Here's some other resources out there for someone that might have, where it's out there. So I reference, going outside, because what's the harm that we're doing if we're not having these important conversations? Because people are going to use substances either way.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good
And then
point.
the other,
So
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and then the other part of that, in that reference section, for the providers, I explained to them about, drug and drug interactions, but I also go into a bunch of other resources out there, such as the Psychedelic Medicine Association, Open Nurses, which is a psychedelic-driven group for nurses, the International Association for Psychedelic Nurses. I also reference CIIS, Psychedelics Today, Psychedelic.support. All of the references I put out there, either I've worked with in the past, or I've have a vested interest with, because I know what they're doing. It is for improving safety, improving access, and improving having conversations and normalizing the conversations about psychedelics. So I really pulled it all together to kind of go, here's more information out there. We're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's good too because, like you said, it's for everybody, in the space. And what I notice about a lot of people in the psychedelic space is they want to know. A lot of them want to know the science and the medicine and the details. And so to have a book that gives you the protocols and is a real guide to also have that background data and information, I think is most of the people in this space are gonna really devour that.
That's how I feel. I always say to people, I really feel, you want to know where you're coming from and where is that based in. But who are you? Where are you basing that information? Where is this, where's the science behind it? So I really wanted to make sure, and that was kind of part of the feeling I said with the publishers. They said, this is getting really academic. I was like, I really don't, I don't want to cut this out, because I think if we don't put it in there, we're going to be doing a disservice, because I want to make sure that we're having these normalized conversations. And I think in a couple of years, as we start moving forward, more openly accepting psychedelic medicines, accepting what they can bring for us, and we start normalizing, it won't be so taboo. It won't be in the psychedelic closet as much, and people are going to really. I want to make that change. I want to make that be a part of improving access for that.
Yeah. And I know in the book you share your own journey and your own story. What about with microdosing? What do you want to share anything about your own personal experiences with that?
Well, first, I'd like to say, really, that was something I want to thank you for, Stuart. Like, that was kind of when I met, the first time I really came out of, instead of talking third person, like hypothetical, was on your podcast, where I'd said, here's the change, and really took into heart, like, I think it's important to have those conversations and saying, I've been here, I've done this. Because I think that's where we can start really seeing the improvement. Because if you're not having those conversations, I think that's the catch-22 of it. If people aren't talking about it, then what do they have to know? Where are they basing on? But at the other side is it automatically changes a bias by disclosing, because there's a vested interest that we have by being a part of having used the substances as well. So it's really I think it's delicate information, a delicate razor to walk, because even in like Janice Phelps' competencies for psychedelic therapists, it was talking about how it's important to having a psychedelic experience. That being said, people have a preconceived notion, and I'm hoping that that's going to change in time. So
yeah, break that stigma.
Yeah, and coming out of that closet, and that was the first time I publicly talked about was on your podcast the first time. And with the first time I'd really seen firsthand when I went to that conference, I said, people were coming up to me and saying, oh my God, I have this experience. Some of the people I talked to were in some of the trials or were working with psilocybin in the studies I had referenced from the 60s and 70s at Hopkins. So it was fascinating to see. Here's people going, oh, I remember I did this, and here I'm okay. I turned out okay. Let's get rid of
Yeah.
that demonization that, this is your brain on drugs with the frying pan
Yeah.
hitting the egg that we remember from years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. Every time I do my live show, which I just did one last Thursday, people come up to me and are like, yeah, I tried this or I did that. And I agree with you. The more we talk, so I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you included it in the book, and I'm glad you're talking about it. So that's awesome. So let's go into some of these details. So what does it mean? What does microdosing even mean? What is that?
Microdosing, well, part of the challenge, I guess, is we don't have a great clear definition by standards. And we've slowly started honing it back and kind of really explaining what it is over time. But there is nothing that's really out there saying this is exactly what it is. The standard when it comes to psychedelics, microdosing is based in the idea between 1/20th and 1/10th of a normal psychedelic experience dose. So when you think of that, we're talking like, if we're talking LSD, acid, we're talking tiny dose. And that was what I had originally put in my book. I said, at 10%, at 1/10th to 1/20th in that range is, around 10 micrograms, no more than 20. And I'd emailed in one of my early revisions, I'd sent a copy to Dr. Fadiman, who was graciously responded and read through my book and gave me some amazing feedback. And I'm very gracious that he was able to do that. It's fantastic. And he said, part of where I've seen over my time and with the thousands and thousands of accounts I've gotten, I really feel when it comes to LSD, it's between 7 and 13 micrograms. But
Interesting.
Which is, I thought it was very interesting because there is no set amount. But microdosing is also a term that we also see in other medications, because you're looking at where's the smallest amount of having an effect. So there's in my Google Scholar, I have stuff pop up all the time for microdosing of arsenic that's out there naturally occurring. So it's an actual term, but when it comes to the psychedelic medicines, there is no clear definition, which is why I'm hoping that with this, the academic research that keeps getting printed keeps giving about the same amount, at 1/20th to 1/10th, which is now the kind of the accepted, but there's nothing that's really said. This is verbatim what it is. So
that's a micro dose, but we're talking about a regimen, right? So it's not just you don't just like one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing for 10 to 20, 30 days, whatever it is. So how long does that regimen go, and what does that regimen look like?
Well, there's a couple of different worlds out there. I know Paul Stamets has his own where he does this 5 days on, 2 days off, kind of microdosing during the week and then take your weekends off idea. But what I wanted to do in my book is I follow what's the Fadiman protocol, which in the Fadiman protocol, there's a dosing day that you take the microdose. Then you have the next day off where you start to kind of have like this come down experience. With large dose psychedelics, sometimes we see that little moonlight phase the next day where things might be a little bit brighter, a little bit better. And then the third day, which is another day off, is kind of the 0 day. You're not taking anything, but you kind of feel where you're at, not taking anything. It's not as good as it was on the day that you dosed. It's not as good as your next day, but you're kind of giving your body a time to reacclimate and kind of know where you're at. And then you go into the 4th day. In the 4th day, you dose again. And the idea, what I kind of explain in the protocol following this Fadiman is, you can't take back when you take a dose. So I encourage people to take, start low, go slow, just like we would with, marijuana edibles or anything else, and see where you're at. You might not feel anything at the low dose on that day. But as you kind of do some journaling, work your way through, a couple of days of doing it, you kind of learn what the it is medication, I guess, if we handle it that way, what the medicine's doing for you. You're noticing if it's making any improvements. And as we slowly increase, we might see side effects. We like nausea. You might see some side effects such as overstimulation, because there is some stimulating effect from hitting those serotonin receptors. But as we do this over time, over a couple of weeks of dosing on, dosing off, we kind of see what the medicine does for us, see if there's any improvement. And ideally, the goal is 6 to 8 weeks. We might not need to even do it dosing at all. I know some people who have gotten a relationship with the medicine as they've dosed it, and kind of might dose once every month or once every couple of months when they feel they need it. They know when they need it. They feel that improvement, but it's not like the traditional pharmacological medication regimen of dosing every day and seeing where we're at. I feel having this protocol is getting a relationship of knowing what the medicine's doing for you and what you're getting from it.
And so a microdose, how do you know when you have the right dose? How does one feel? Like, so I take a microdose, I feel nothing. I ramp it up a little bit. Suddenly I feel a little sparkly. So I'm like, maybe that's too much. What is the right feeling once one has taken a microdose? What should they be feeling physically, emotionally, in their mind, whatever?
Ideally, the idea is, things might feel a little lighter. The sun might seem a little bit brighter. You might feel a little bit more connected with people around you and places around you, and just kind of changing our attitude and our mindset of what's going on. If we have a dose that goes too high, we might be overstimulated. We might have, or we just don't feel good. It might be our mindset is not in the right place. We might just feel not well overall. So it's really finding that little spot where, like, when you feel it is kind of the idea, and slowly going up and until you find where you might have benefits, where you might feel this is a good amount, this is a good place. And as with any even medicine, there's always a reason why we're taking it, but there's also a side effect that we can experience with them. Same thing with other antidepressant medications. So I kind of explained in the book how to kind of manage some of the common side effects, such as nausea, sleep disturbances, things like that, and kind of, maybe dosing earlier in the day if you're overstimulated, or being mindful of not adding caffeine with it, or if you have a little bit of nausea, taking it with, like, making it into a tincture or a tea, or take some lemon or ginger with it, just to kind of help settle your stomach with it.
And how the typical psychedelic journey concepts of setting intentions, mindset, setting, diet, do those things also play into microdosing regimen?
I think it does. And I think that's kind of where it got really interesting, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole, especially when you look at, the common argument is the research out there shows that the placebo effect, like we're having all these, the improvements that we're seeing is due to, it's in our mindset. But I think it's important to kind of look at the deeper, bigger picture of what is the, like, extra or non-biological, non-pharmacological factors that are going into place with doing this microdosing journey. I think it's, if you have a mindset that something's not going to work, it's not going to work. There's that nocebo effect that's out there. But I think it's also important to kind of look at, making sure you're in a good spot when you're doing it, in a good mindset. You're trying to make some improvements. And that's where, in my 6-week journey piece of the in the protocol, is I go into having time to kind of look at what's important for us. What are our because the other part I didn't mention is my holistic nursing background, where I'm looking at the whole person. And we discussed that a little bit in the first episode I did with you. There's this the whole idea of the biopsychosocial spiritual model that is important, because we're, beings that are interacting in the world around us. So there's these other factors I think that are important to kind of really help make improvements. Like, if you're living in a spot where, the conversation I have with patients all the time are, you have, depression and anxiety, but you're eating like crap. You're living in a stressful area where, poverty stricken. You're worried about, I've had patients who, their big concern was they kept running out of heating oil or wood pellets or electricity. I can't fix your depression and anxiety when you're worried about the power going out in the middle of the night and the potential of freezing to death in the cold Maine winter. But if you can kind of address some of these things with this, improving our setting of where we're at, our physical setting, we might have more apt to have better improvements moving forward. So that's where I kind of broke down part of these other things to kind of think about, like, where do you want to move yourself physically? Where are you looking at mentally wanting to move forward? Where are your intentions? How are you interacting with the people around you? How are you interacting with work and your other stresses involved, to kind of, like, as we're making these connections, as we're making the physical changes in our brain from the microdosing, we're also making these other connections, these pathways in our mind of how are we thinking outside the box? How are we changing our groove? Because I think so much of depression, anxiety, a lot of mental health conditions are our mindset of where we're stuck and not changing how we're interacting with the world around us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes great sense. Because I have seen stuff about the placebo effect and, with microdosing, but it's interesting, if it's working, it's working. And if one's preparation is to control caffeine consumption, alcohol consumption, eat better, meditate, and prepare, then that's an outcome that's hard to argue with, even though, no matter what it is that is causing it. It's the opposite of what you're saying there. You can have all these bad things going on in your life, but there's also some powerful things one can do leading up to a microdosing regimen that are likely to have a great effect even just on their own.
Yeah, and that was part of the rabbit hole that I went down in my researching, and where I really changed my mindset of where microdosing can be absolutely different. As I got into doing the research on what the placebo effect is, these non-pharmacological factors that are there. Dr. Ido Hart, I'm going to butcher his name, Hartogassen, he has some great research out there about the placebo effect in medicine in general, and not necessarily that it's a placebo effect, but these other factors that you take into consideration, such as, like, when you go in to see your medical provider, if you're walking into an office that is dimly lit, nothing on the walls, and kind of cold, a cold environment, you might not have the best improvements. But if you have someone, your provider is smiling, they might be wearing a tie, their diplomas hanging out on the wall, and they've got some big bright books that look really smart around it, you might have more confidence in them. By having more confidence in them, you might have more improvements in the medicine, whatever they're prescribing, because of these other factors. You have confidence that they're going to be able to help you.
Yeah, that's good. So you've talked about LSD, and I think an easy assumption out there is we're also talking about the potential to microdose psilocybin mushrooms. What are there other psychedelics that people successfully microdose, or that one might even recommend microdosing, or is it really sticking to those two?
My book, I really stuck to the two classic psychedelics out there. I really stuck to the psilocybin LSD. They're very chemically similar. One, without getting into the nuance, lost in the weeds of it, they're very chemically similar. Psilocybin ends up having, at high doses, a shorter duration because it doesn't quite stick as well to the serotonin 2A receptors like LSD does. But when it comes to, the microdosing, I really stuck to those two without going into the deeper. There are some people out there that I've seen that talk about Amanita muscaria, doing it. I've seen some people talk about DMT microdosing. I really stuck to the psilocybin and LSD just because part of which is there's not a lot of great research out there with psychedelics and microdosing in general, but this is like the two substances that are the most out there, and I think it's really easy to kind of if you're going to make like for me, if I'm going to make an assumption and say, it seems like if this is the case, then this, the two, you can kind of make some of those assumptions scientifically with those two because they're so chemically similar and their reactions might just the half-life just happens to be longer, but there are a lot of the way that they work, the mechanism of action and how they work are very similar, and they're the most researched out there. I'd love to see other things out there in the future. I don't know where we're going to use that at this time, but the other part is I think it's also important to look at, like when it comes to LSD, you have to know where you're getting it and trusted where it's at. We've seen and heard the horror stories of blotter acid being out there that's, fentanyl with the fentanyl crisis, and we don't know. And I really go into, knowing, in my book, I went into talking about, knowing what you're at, kind of getting an idea of what your dosing is. And even if you get a dosing protocol with the substances, if you change your substance, either being LSD or psilocybin, if you change your axis of where it is, you might need to go back through and redose and figure out where you're at, because dose to dose, strain to strain, it does alter slightly. But I think the other part that was really important, I think, when it comes to psilocybin is it's the easy access out there. I don't want to, condone any illegal activity. That was never my point in the book. I don't go into the weeds of how to grow psilocybin because that's illegal. But when it comes to accessing psilocybin, I think it's 47 or 48 states, you can purchase the spores for mycology use only, I want to add. But if you theoretically were to put it in a boomer bag, jars, whatever, and hypothetically had access to these mushrooms that somehow grew, then you would be able to do these types of things. And there is places out there also that are legally open and the decriminalization, which I think is really going to be exciting to see as we're having these improvements. People might be growing them in different places that are legal, decriminalized. It's not full legal, but you can not have a little less stress. I think one of the biggest risk out there when it comes to microdosing is being caught with having mushrooms. There's that actual case of, if you were caught with it, one of the harms that you could end up having is life-changing prosecution, criminal time, etc. That, I think that's one of the big risks that are out there. But if you're willing to kind of forego that and do it, and hypothetically you were to do it, I want you to be able to do it safely. So it's, I think it's important to have that access. I think it's important to, if someone's going to do it, we can get it. And that's where I think it's exciting when it comes to psilocybin in general, is it can grow naturally. People can access it and you can get it and kind of know what you're getting out there. So it improves the access than even normal pharmaceutical medications, because people don't have access to expensive medications, even with insurance. And I see that every day in my practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mentioned this in the intro, but also just say it again now, is just everybody make sure you understand the laws, in your area, and do this in a legal way and also in a safe way. So you mentioned harm reduction. And I know, because I actually secondhand, one of my good friend's neighbor's kid has died from LSD. Mm-hmm. And I always ask people, did he really die from LSD? And everyone's like, no. It was laced with something, because he didn't test it. So with a micro, so we know about testing, dancesafe.org, we got to do all these things. But is there anything when it comes to a microdosing regimen per se that people should, like if you do a macro dose, right? If somebody's going to do 3.5 grams or do a large dose at 4 to 6 grams, they know that, they're taught by our community to have a trip sitter, somebody with them or nearby that knows what's going on, that can keep them safe. What are there harm reduction recommendations for microdosing regimen?
Well, I one of the things I put in the book was I mentioned, the Fireside Project, because if you accidentally take a macro dose when you intend on taking a microdose, those things could theoretically happen. Even, especially if you get into a heavier strain that might be more, or if you end up, you have access to, when we're talking micrograms, and you have, if you had LSD that was on, a sheet, and you cut it even into tenths and it was stronger than you might end up inadvertently, you're now all of a sudden fighting dragons and tasting sound is how I said it. You might have that, so I think it's important to have like the dance safe Fireside Project out there to kind of go about it. But if you know what you're doing, and theoretically, if you're starting at these micro slow doses and slowly building up, the risk is low. I don't want to say it's zero, especially when it comes to, if you don't know what you have. But if you have mushrooms and I put in there how to grind them up and put them into capsules once you kind of know what your dosing is and kind of go into that.
Yeah.
But if you know that you're taking these small doses, I kind of encourage on your first dose day, maybe doing it on the weekend or a day that you don't have anything going on that's too important, just in case you have, rebound anxiety. And I think that's also the other thing when it comes to other, medications, pharmaceutical medications out there. You start a medication for anxiety, or, you can be too tired from it. You can have these other effects from it, and you're not going to have a very productive day. So until you really know what you're doing and how you're going about it and build that relationship, these things can happen.
Yeah, smart. I like that. So another comparison between macrodose and microdose, with the macrodose, we're taught to integrate our experiences, maybe journal, have discussions with an integration coach. How does that compare with a microdosing regimen? Do you integrate? Do you have lessons? Do you journal? What do you recommend?
So I ended up putting together in the book, that last third of the book is really the integration. I put in there kind of a mood chart to kind of come up with, tracking your mood day to day. Lots of pieces in this workbook. I put in like what I use is the PHQ-8 to kind of screen for depression, to see where you're at, to see these improvements. But I put room in there for a couple pages to do notes. I explain kind of setting goals, setting your intention, moving forward, and kind of come up with these ideas as you're working on some ideas. Because really, when it comes to microdosing, and I didn't even mention this in the beginning. I mean, I probably should have. There's really, if you think about it, there's three motivations of why people want to microdose. Those are to improve performance, whatever that performance is, relieve a pathological condition such as pain, depression, anxiety, or to assist in stopping pharmaceuticals such as other anti-depressant medications, anti-anxiety medications, pain medications, whatever it is. And that's where I think it's important to be working with your medical provider with these ideas of, here's what I'm going to do, and here's where, is this is this achievable? Am I setting this? Am I on the right path? So then the other part of what I go into in the book is I explain what is an intention, how to kind of go about it, celebrating your wins, kind of moving forward with a note. I talk about what self-care is and why it's important and how it's not selfish to do. Part of what I also have in here was this, how to kind of come up with some ideas for your own self-care. And week to week, I have other different ideas that are in here of how to kind of look at our world around us and to kind of really get us thinking outside the box of integrating the processes we're doing it and making these changes. And one of my favorite things in here that Taraleigh had done, and I shout out to Taraleigh Weathers over at rockinglife.com, who's my partner on this. She had, we came up with this Myco mixtape, kind of go on, this journey of music and working on where are we going and make these improvements and kind of, so it was really a fun thing of like, happy songs, nostalgic songs, and kind of really getting us thinking outside the box of just like, I'm doing this microdose and I'm going to get this improvement. But really, it's fun. It was like the 6-week journey that we came up with, and And really, it was fun. Like in the 6 weeks, what I talk about is like week 1 is setting your intention. Week 2 is getting to know your fun guys or gals or not gender non-conforming. The fun guy is the play on words. I was being a little dad joke punny there. Week 3, week 3 is spreading your mycelium network of self, growing yourself outside of yourself and thinking outside the box. Week 4 is
nice.
how much room do you have to grow, kind of as we're growing and dosing as we're moving. Week 5 is not tripping, straight up living, kind of pulling it all together. And then week 6 was the integration. What's next? And where are we at? Where are we going to kind of come up with what's working with the medications, what's not? So really, that was the fun part of the book. Is it's not just doing the dosing, but really getting the ball rolling, setting your intention, moving forward, reassessing your world around you, and what are you getting from doing the microdosing? How is it affecting you mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and how are you, our place in the world around us?
Yeah, nice. So there is a lot to. It's not just a matter of taking the medicines or the drugs. There's work to be done on one's own, just like you would do with any other kind of a psychological or spiritual journey.
Absolutely. And that was kind of the part I thought was really fun with it. Because, in my daily practice of prescribing medications, one of the things I explain to patients daily is, I can prescribe medications, but it's not going to change where you are in the world. It's not going to change necessarily how we're interacting with it, because it's not going to, that's not what's going to happen. It's going to help you cope with the world around you. And that's where, having therapy and working with a therapist, working with someone else to kind of really change our views and doing the behavioral piece to it. But, when it comes to microdosing, we're not doing that necessarily. We might not have the luxury of having a therapist, having someone who's really open to knowing what we're doing. And I wanted to kind of really give that to the reader to kind of go, let's think outside of ourselves and how are we doing? What is making us think differently? What's doing it? Which then kind of goes back to the question of, is it the medicine that's working? Is it the, doing the microdosing? Is it the way that we're seeing things interacting around us? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is, but all of this together is going to give us better improvements. Research out there shows that medication, the medication is only one piece of the puzzle, and the people that do psychotherapy with antidepressant medications have a 60% improvement over medications alone. So it's really important to do both. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating stuff.
So speaking of research, is there anything out there going on right now that you're aware of that you kind of have your eye on in terms of research around microdosing?
I'm hopeful we're going to start seeing more. I think it's going to be interesting to see. One of at one point in writing the book, and when I went down that rabbit hole, I started seeing. There was 2 studies that came out, both of them out of England. And what they looked at was they found that people who microdose that had the intention, people that had a outlook that they're going to have improvements had better outcomes, which I think is obvious when it comes to anything. You have your heart set on something being good, it likely might be better than not. About 3 weeks after that came out, was the biggest study of that came out was looking at microdosing and the improvements that come with it. Are there some improvements? Is it just a placebo effect or not? And that was kind of where I wanted to really look at the research. So, and my feeling was like you had said, does it really matter if there's improvement or not, where it's coming from, as long as there's improvement? I have that Machiavellian feel to it too. Like, who necessarily cares why, as long as we're seeing some research or seeing some improvement? So I went and I looked at, my feeling was, if we're going to be looking at microdosing, I want to have it. Let's hold it to the same standard out there as antidepressant medications. Let's hold it to the same standard that we have of what's out there, because that's kind of the big common common improvement. And that was one part I had really worked on in the book, was looking at, there was some research by Irving Kirsch, Boston area, who looked at, the improvements and looking at the STAR-D trial, which is the largest trial when it comes to antidepressant medications and their improvement. And, he really, when he ended up first publishing his stuff back around 2008, it shook the world, really, because the research that was out there when it's coming out with what's the improvement was saying, here we're having these high numbers in these trials. But what Kirsch did is him and his students went in and got like Freedom of Information Acted, the rest of the trial information for the medication trials, and pulled those numbers and reran all of the research that's out there. And what he found was absolutely fascinating, because what he found was like around 30% of people that had a improvement with antidepressants that you could say it's absolutely from the medication. You had 25% or so that said the improvements are because of these other factors we don't really know. And then there's the other factors that could be in the passage of time, like, as we have something that's depressing happening in our life, as time goes on, time heals a little bit, we pull our social supports, we naturally start to make some improvements. And with, he looked at all of that and really put it out there. And when he published this, there was a huge backlash. He ended up publishing a book with it, looking at it, and really it changed. Really, and I explained that is one of the things that when that changed, after that, you didn't see as large clinical studies being done by like the STAR-D, where the federal government's putting money. It's all now private industry done research.
Yeah.
And what he had also said was, if you look at, you can do a clinical trial, they cost a lot of money, but if they fail, you can just put the money into doing another clinical trial. And as you keep doing it, all you need to do is have 2 clinical trials where you're having these stark improvements. And now you can say, okay, let's go for FDA approval because it's improved. And I don't want to say all medications are bad. That's not my point. But I think it's important to kind of really look at, there's a time and place, and everything that's out there for medications are very similar in how they work. What is treatment-resistant depression when you're, if we're doing everything, all of our medications are either SSRI or SNRI medications, they're all working in the same way. Where's the improvement there compared to these other things? So in the trials, that are done on the placebo type effects, I think, I explained in here, you gotta think of, let's hold it the same standard. Kirsch's work, like I said, for the SSRIs, he proved in 2008 that antidepressants do work to decrease depressive symptoms in many. He also proved that placebos are effective in decreasing depressive symptoms in many.
Right.
Holding it to the research that's out there, participants who microdose psychedelics and are receiving a placebo have improvements in mood, energy, creativity, emotional states, and anxiety when they're taking a placebo. Participants who are taking a placebo or taking microdosing, they're having improvements as well. So the research is showing that all the people are having improvements, whether it's placebo, whether it's antidepressants, whether it's microdosing or not. And expectation bias does change that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. There was the Dr. Cizagetti, who's the one who did the largest placebo study that came out last year. He found part of the expectation bias was people who knew or thought that they were taking a microdose had higher improvements over by having problems with their self-blinding. They knew that they were taking something, they had higher improvements, which people go, okay, there's a blinding problem here, but the same research is out there for the antidepressant medications. It's the same way, and I think that we need to kind of keep an eye on that instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. As this research comes out, do you have plans to do updated versions of the book?
I would love to do that. I would love to. I reached out to Cizetti. I've reached out to a couple of people who are doing some of the research and introduced myself, and I have this book. And I think that that's kind of where the excitement is out there, because they can kind of pull together some protocols that are going, here's what we've got out there. And we're going to see microdosing come out even more. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see more research. I'm hopeful we can kind of figure out how to kind of blind it and how to, because in that largest placebo, what they found early on was people were noticing they were having belching, they were burping the mushrooms, so they knew that they were blinded. So they found, giving chaga reishi mushrooms blind it a little bit better. But I'm hopeful that, as we start kind of really, I want to see that we're going to treat it the same way across the board as the SSRIs. And I want to see the research. And I'm hoping that as we start to see decriminalization and legalization change in these cities, in these states, in these individual municipalities moving forward, and it gets opened a little bit more, we're going to start seeing this research being able to be done a little bit better. Because, when you're doing this research now, you're breaking the law when you're starting to do it, which is why we're not getting the research being done, because you can't get the major foundations, major universities to even allow it, because you, by definition, have to be breaking the law to be doing this. Even though these are these small microdoses that are, relatively safe overall.
Yeah, good point. All right, just a couple last questions. So, what haven't I asked you about the book or about microdosing in general? Is there something else that you want to make sure to get out there to everybody?
I think that the one important thing I think I really wanted to point out is one of the, it is relatively safe. And I explained the drug-on-drug and potential interactions. and kind of really broke it down. I also put in the book for the providers, kind of like, if a patient comes to you on XYZ medications, here's the potential interaction, how you might be able to come up with a new plan for changing their medications to help work with them to be. But the other part that I think is, when you start hearing the microdosing, there's this huge issue that's up in the air where people are trying to figure out is it safe because of the potential cardiac considerations, because of the serotonin 2B receptors that are out there. And two of the people I'd talked to were pharmacists who work with psychedelic medicines, both the spirit pharmacist, Dr. Ben Malcolm, and I'd also spoke with Dr. Kellen Thompson, who does a lot of research. He's talked about these potential cardiac risks because of the binding that happens at the 2B receptor. And it's kind of like, the idea is it's kind of polarized, because people go, this is a huge concern. But then there's people in the psychedelic space that are also going, well, if we were seeing it because people were doing these high doses of many psychedelics, in the 50s and 60s, some people were doing them daily. Are there, they weren't having any of these effects either. So I think that's going to be the important thing to kind of look at as we're moving forward is, what's going on cardiac wise? Are we going to be seeing some of these risks? And if we do, where do we fix that? How do we talk with our cardiologists if we need to? But it's still all hypothetical at this time. And that's where I really want to make sure that we're I don't want to say it's completely safe and then, 5 years down the road we have cardiac issues that are happening with it. But a lot of the basis of the research that's coming on are based on one of the medications, like one of the two that was in the medication, fen that had cardiac. Those were high dose, and those were medications that people were taking daily. And then there's some of the medications out there, such as there's a couple of these anti-migraine medications that have been discontinued by the FDA because of the cardiac risk. But those were highly binding, and those were taken more often than, every fourth day of dosing for 6 to 8 weeks and then stopping and coming back. So I think it's going to be, I don't want to say it's safe, like I said, completely, but I think it's going to be important to kind of really look at this. I think as we start getting more people who have been microdosing and can kind of explore these cardiac risks potentially, to kind of go, okay, here's where we're at. Here's what's going on, where it's kind of important for us to, talk with our healthcare providers about what we're doing so we can learn from this breadth of knowledge across the board.
Yeah, good point. Okay, well, so how do people get this book? Where can they find it? I hear that Barnes & Noble might have it on their shelves.
Barnes & Noble, my local Barnes & Noble had it before I even had a copy of it, because it was pushed off in March, which was fascinating because I was there with my daughter and I'm like, oh my God, here's my book on the shelf. It was that, oh my God moment. It was so cool.
Yeah,
and I had to apologize
that's cool.
because I bought the only copy there, and I was like, I don't even have
They will replenish. Yeah, they'll get it back in inventory.
They have. I've been back in and signed a couple copies and left it on the shelf.
Nice.
It's available everywhere. because it's published by Ulysses Press, but it was graciously picked up by Simon and Schuster for distribution. So literally, you can get it at any bookstore can get it in. So if you want to, if you're going to big box chain, Barnes & Noble, Indigo's in Canada has it, Books A Million, independent bookstores, if they don't have it in the shelf, you can order it from them. They can get it in, distributed through Simon Schuster. It is available on Amazon to purchase. So it is available anywhere that you get books, literally, which is where I'm really happy with having and having that distribution, which was when I found that out, I was just like, oh my God. When I saw it on being sold on Walmart.com that you could pre-order it, I was like, oh my God, this is weird.
Yeah, that is weird. Never thought you'd see that, huh?
Never in a million years would I see that.
That's awesome. Awesome. Good to see your name. Well, CJ, thank you so much for obviously for doing the podcast again, but really for all the work and the expertise that you put into this book. I think it's an important book that the community needs, and I will do what I can to make sure people know about this. So thank you for the hard work and for coming back and sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me, as I said, Stuart. Thank you for the support. Been here with you, since the beginning, and I think it's important to have, that grassroots, that word of mouth that people are having and talking about this, and kind of just like having these conversations in general is where it's going to change the stigma, and people are going to really feel more open about it. I found that myself when I was writing and working in, psychedelic work to begin with. I didn't know how to go about it, but I had a few people, just having Michael Pollan's book with me on my desk. People came up to me and go, "Oh, what is that?" Just because of his name, and they'd read his other work on nutrition and health and stuff. And it was just like people who I had no idea or would have ever thought had any interest were like, "Oh, I'm going to read this now," which is where it's exciting with the pollinization of the psychedelic industry is just having that. So I think it's, as we have these conversations, you're going to be surprised. I've been very surprised with people who are like, "Oh, I've tried this in the past. I would never do it again." But I talked to one gentleman at a bookstore here who was getting it in, who told me that they had the conversation, not even knowing that the book came out, that she was getting her grandfather or her father, who was in his 80s, was looking at microdosing for cognitive benefits. And this is before he even knew anything about my book. And she's like, he's already started trying it because he used psychedelics in the 60s and was like, "Well, I've got nothing else to lose. I've tried everything else. Let's go about it." And he was starting to see improvement. So it's just fascinating. Here's an 80-year-old guy who's going at trying it because I've tried everything. It's holistic. It's different. It's natural when it comes to the mushroom. So I think it's going to be fun to see people doing it and really having these conversations and just spreading the word in general. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So CJ Spotswood, the Entheo nurse, author, the Microdosing Manual, thank you so much for doing this. And I look forward to connecting with you again, man.
I look forward to it as well, Stuart. Thank you very much.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.